In the 1860s, the Russian Navy had gotten on board with the idea of having armoured ships, but much of their construction had been geared around coastal defence craft like monitors, with relatively few true ocean-going ironclads. However, Russia had ambitions to compete on the world stage, and for that not only was a navy required, but it also had to be a navy that could pose some kind of threat to the larger navies like Britain or France. Coming to the conclusion that matching sheer numbers would be impossible, Russian naval thinking instead began to look at commerce warfare. Most shipping was protected by unarmoured frigates and corvettes, although the term cruiser was gradually coming into use instead for these ships. So the logical solution seemed to be to build a few large vessels that were heavily armed to the degree that they could rapidly destroy most of these smaller craft, but which were also protected against the most likely return fire they might experience, and should be capable of long-range cruising of their own. The layout of the ships would thus blend what would later be formally labelled cruiser design ideas with the protection and gun layout taken from ironclad battleship principles to create what some have argued as being the world's first armoured cruisers. Two ships were ordered, General-Admiral and Alexander Nevsky, but the latter was renamed whilst under construction to Herzog Edinburghski, and yes, that does mean Duke of Edinburgh, the cause of the renaming being that Queen Victoria's second son, and a relatively accomplished officer in the Royal Navy, Prince Alfred, had just married Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna, eldest daughter of Tsar Alexander II. Laid down in 1870, both ships would be built in St. Petersburg, with the lead ship launched in 1873 and commissioned in 1875, whilst the latter was launched in 1875 and commissioned in 1877. Protection was the only major thing the two ships had in common, with an iron belt 6 inches thick that tapered to 5 inches at either end, with 6-inch protection found over the main battery, which was a couple of decks above the belt. Displacing just over 5,000 tons and capable of around 12 knots thanks to a 4,700 indicated horsepower power plant that drove a single shaft, with alternate or supplementary propulsion provided by 3 masts, the ships could carry large amounts of coal, but they could also hoist the screw out of the water and collapse the funnel, like early ironclad battleships, in order to make pure sailing easier. The lead vessel had 5 boilers, whilst the latter had 4 to a different design and turned out to be slightly slower as a result. A little more speed could be had in bursts of forced draft, but this could not be sustained for very long. The underwater hull had an insulative wooden sheath which allowed the ships to be coppered, since anti-fouling paint of any real reliability or durability had yet to be invented. Armament also differed. General-Admiral carried 6 single 8-inch guns in a central battery, along with a pair of 6-inch guns and a 6-inch mortar, the smaller guns being installed at the ends of the ship as chase weapons. Herzog Edinburghski had just 4 of the 8-inch guns, but took 3 additional 6-inch instead, for a total of 5. Whilst more powerful and better protected than any contemporary cruiser, the weight of the armour and the underperformance of their engines compared to the design specifications limited their speed to the point that the faster ironclad battleships could in fact overhaul them, which would affect future Russian cruiser design, which then leaned into the speed. Overweight on completion, an effort to strip out extra equipment saw the first ship's 6-inch mortar go ashore, amongst other things, but the addition of electrical power, the equipment that ran off of it, a number of small guns, and torpedo tubes resulted in overall weight actually going up further, which pushed the belt armour underwater and made the ships dangerously unstable, so the 6-inch guns were removed as well. Further efforts saw the ship's rig being reduced and some of the coal bunkers were turned into crew quarters. This limited the ship's range, but between them these measures solved some of the stability issues. The Russo-Turkish War in the late 1870s was missed by both ships. General-Admiral was actually in commission, but had grounded and was under repair at the time, and her sister ship was still fitting out. By the time of the Russo-Japanese War, they were far too old, and were serving as training ships, which meant that in fact their first combat use would come 40 years after they were laid down, in World War I. Having been reboilered as well as being rearmed so many times that it's almost impossible to keep track of what was done to who, in the latter part of the 1900s the ships had been renamed to Nerova and Onega. The masts much reduced to a pair of simple poles, and the ships refitted into mine layers with a minimal light armament of 3-inch guns, which was just about suitable for seeing off destroyers. Both ships would then spend considerable time laying mines during the war, with Onega having the shorter career. She was then taken out of service in 1915, renamed Barricada No. 9, and used on harbour-only duties, mostly as a mine storage depot in Helsinki. It's not entirely clear what then happened to her. Some sources say that she was broken up there in the 1920s, others that she was returned to the Soviet Union after Finland got its independence, and then the ship was broken up after the end of World War II. Nerova remained in active service, passing directly into Soviet hands, and then became a mine warfare training ship, renamed to the Russian version of 25th of October in 1924, before becoming a stationary harbour hulk in 1938. Again, sources differ as to her fate. Some say that she was used as a floating workshop until being broken up in 1944, and others that she was eventually sunk as a breakwater on the Neva River in 1959, which would be almost 90 years after her keel was laid.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.